Hello you malty Mocha Moose tracks. It's a malt mention, and a big malt mention thank you to Dan Swank 3378 who has provided the malt mention, because a malt mention is what you need to get this video started. I'm Ralphie, this is the Bothy, the home of Scotch whisky single malt reviews and other quality spirits as well. And this is Ralphie Review 1008, the final review of 2023. And I was having a wee think about what whisky I would review for you, and I settled on this. This is the Glenfiddich non-age statement, XX, bottling, 47%. It's unchill filtered because it says so somewhere. I think it probably says so in the, give me a second, on the box, where it's kind of a bit more legible. Here it is. This product is non-chill filtered and in extreme cold temperatures or in addition of water may develop a slight haze. Absolutely. It's called the Exceptional Series, and this is batch number 2. The backstory is quite simple. The Glenfiddich Whisky Company have got 20 experts to go into their warehouse and hand select. Hand selected, you know, it's important, that bit. Individual casks to create a small batch of higher strength Glenfiddich that's unchill filtered. And of course this has kind of drawn my attention because generally I don't review Glenfiddichs. Of the 12 times in over 10 years and 14 years that I've reviewed Glenfiddich, 4 times with the 15-year-old and 4 times with the 12-year-old. Because I don't review old expensive whiskies because I don't think they're worth the money. It's as simple as that. So I don't buy them. And the Glenfiddich range is, in my opinion, very conservative. It's a soft, gentle style of single malt. A little bit grassy, cereal, barley sugar, touch of vanilla, and not a lot of sensation contribution in the terms of sweet, sour, salt, savoury and bitter. In particular, it tends to be a slight sweet and sour note. That tends to be a very restrained sensation range. So this is what I'm familiar with Glenfiddich. And also, you cannot buy any Glenfiddich from independent bottlers. Sure, occasionally in some obscure, well, not so obscure, but in some independent bottlers they'll get what's called a teaspoon version, so they can't call it Glenfiddich, but essentially it is, and it tends to get rated quite highly because of the singularity of the single cask. But this is small batch, 20 casks into the mix, unchill filtered. What are we getting? Because this is a big brand presenting in a way of more interest to the whisky aficionado, someone who has experience with single malts and is looking, frankly, for a better non-generic presentation of the single malt. Well, here's the results. I think there's a little bit of colour added to this. The colour, when I'm looking at it, there it is. It's got that kind of what they call rich gold, right? It's colour, it's dye, in my opinion. The fact that they don't say anywhere in the packaging that it's natural colour leads me to believe that, being a large generic single malt producer, that they're always going to leave their options open to add a certain amount of colour where they feel the need. And fair play to them. When you're selling big volumes of whiskey, it makes it easier for you to package and present your brand. The nose is completely unpeated, fresh. So this is a relatively young whiskey. I'd say between 8 and 10 years old. So it's fresh, cereal note driven. So you've got these barley notes like barley sugar, barley cereal, barley grain, slight citrus in the nose, grapefruit and lemon citrus. But it's quite sort of summer meadows, summer fields, crop harvesty type of flavours. If I can make that analogy, I hope it makes sense to you. I'm just really trying to be specific as best I can about a very generalised nose that really doesn't have much in particular in the way of distinctiveness or signature to it. And I'm not saying that as a criticism, it's just simply that Glenfiddich as a brand of single malt is very light in every way. Taste. A little bit brittle on arrival. Flat sour. Sweet sour, flat sour. Almost a kind of scorched, slight licorice note there in the development going through to the finish. It's not particularly balanced. It seems to be lacking in flavour. There's something really out of, as I mentioned, unbalanced. That really does come across as the sensations do not balance with the flavours. The flavours of the barley sugar and the barley cereal are just too light, and therefore the event's being dominated by the sensation, and yet there's still not actually an awful lot happening. Let's add some water and try and keep this positive. I'm not adding much water. It's been bottled at 47%, but frankly, if they bottled it at 40%, it would be positively anemic and completely uneventful. I've added about 3 millilitres of water. I feel that's all it needs. I'm just going to let it sit for a minute, right? Just a minute, while I kind of show you something which is a little bit eccentric about this presentation. And that is, you've got a standard 70 centilitre European sized bottling, and yet the container is far larger than the bottle needs, right? So when you put the bottle in the container, it really rattles about, and for whatever reason, it's no big deal, but it really annoys me. I think perhaps they're just trying to use the same container for either a 70 or a 75 centilitre, so that's an American-sized bottle, and just sort of streamline their requirements for packaging. Let's get back to the whiskey. The nose is softened up. It's a little bit richer, a little bit creamier, a bit more cereal creamy. There's not a huge amount of sensory development going on for the nose. So let's go to the taste. If anything, having added water, the cereal note has kind of become a little bit more oily, but the sensation range has intensified, particularly in sour and grain bitter. The finish is remarkably swift. This is not hanging about in the palate much. It's a young, green, so unripe flavour, which, to be honest, there's not too much I can say about. This has been bottled for passive consumers. In other words, the customers who are brand led and who don't know much about the flavour of whisky. And they're looking for a fancy version of Glenfiddich to give to someone instead of the standard 12-year-old Glenfiddich, because the price difference between the two of them isn't that great. So it kind of lies between the 12 and the 15-year-old version. The 15-year-old is certainly better. I recommend that any day over this. To me, this has been an exercise in marketing hype, which simply hasn't delivered in the smell and the taste of the whisky. The thing is, when you've got 20 experts going into a warehouse to get 20 casks, and then they're going to get blended together, the producers are creating a narrative here. And then what it tells us, the experienced whisky drinker, is that we're talking a really small batch of Glenfiddich, unchill filtered at 47%. So we should be expecting a more concentrated, flavoursome delivery of the signature of the distillery. And it's really under-delivering spectacularly. Let's give it another go before the malt mark. The nose is settling down. In fairness, the cereal note of the barley is becoming more prominent. It's fresh, it's kind of crispy, it's slightly zesty on the nose, but in the palate, there's something there's almost as if you're heading towards a metallic note. It's completely unbalanced and lacking the richness of the grain in harmony with the sensation intensities, which have sort of rounded off a little bit, and somewhere in there you could see there could be the potential of a really interesting gutsy version of Glenfiddich, but it just hasn't happened. You may notice in the glass a little bit of haze coming through, but not a lot. I think I'd have to add more water and leave it more time. So I'm wondering if it's partially filtered, just not chill filtered. But mark-wise, I'm not going to hang around. 79 out of 100, and that's your malt mark. I can't call it integrity malt mark because there's really no disclosure in whether colouring's added. I think there's been an attempt to certainly head in that direction, and I commend Glenfiddich for it. But what I would say is that this is a version of Glenfiddich which has been created for passive consumers, not for true whisky enthusiasts, who, in fact, when I bought this, what I was really subconsciously trying to buy was an independent bottling of Glenfiddich that actually says Glenfiddich, but it just doesn't exist. And that's a real shame. There's no doubt about it that the independent bottlers are hugely successful at showcasing the singularity of single malt to the market. But Glenfiddich does not create that opportunity. And therefore, I think it's going to be a very long time before I review another Glenfiddich. Simply being practical about it, and when I do, it'll probably be another 12-year-old or another 15-year-old, and basically that's about it. I know that there's some fancy versions out there, your Fire and Cane and all the rest of it, but what puts me off is the overt marketing alarm bells are ringing. That it's the gimmickiness, the gimmicky of the presentation to try and present gimmicky flavours, which inevitably are just going to create disappointment. Just a reminder, by the way, that the big whisky companies, they're not really producing whisky for the true whisky enthusiast. They're too big to be bothered by that. The true whisky enthusiast is really not that important in their market, in my opinion. This is for the more ambitious, passive consumer who's still going to be brand-led and buy a fancy version of a very familiar brand and a very recognisable brand. All credit to Glenfiddich, hugely recognisable. And I'm sure that once the receiver of the bottle has put plenty of ice in it, they're going to be very happy in the great big heavy-weighted tumbler, so as they can see in the new year. Good luck to them. I'm Ralphie, thank you for watching, we'll see you soon.